Lauren spent a typical day working from home. Her office was located in a cozy corner of her apartment, small but comfortable, on the outskirts of Seattle. The city seemed gloomy on this autumn day. Rain tapped against the windows, and passers-by, bundled in jackets, hurried across the streets. Lauren loved Seattle, though loneliness often made her life feel dull. After graduating from college, she had few friends left, and her remote job didn't require much interaction with people. Still, she had grown accustomed to the quiet of her home. When evening came, the rain intensified. Lauren decided to take a walk to the nearest supermarket to buy something for dinner. She put on a raincoat, grabbed an umbrella, and headed out. The air was cold, and the smell of wet leaves filled the streets. She walked along the sidewalk, listening to the raindrops tapping on her umbrella. Suddenly, she noticed movement by the side of the road. Something rustled in the shadows of the trees. Approaching cautiously, Lauren saw a black cat. Its fur was wet and dull, and its eyes glowed yellow under the streetlight. It sat motionless, staring straight at her. Lauren stopped, expecting it to run away, as stray animals usually did, but the cat didn't move. Its gaze was so intense that Lauren felt a pang of pity. "What are you doing here, little one?" she said softly, crouching down. The cat continued to stare at her. Its behavior seemed strange. She reached out her hand, expecting it to hiss or run away, but instead the cat took a step forward and rubbed against her palm. Its fur was wet and cold, but surprisingly soft. "You must be freezing. Do you have an owner?" Lauren looked it over. There was no collar or any sign that it belonged to someone. "All right, don't be scared," she said, turning around to see if there were any other people nearby, perhaps the cat's owners. But the street was empty. The cat didn't leave her side. It seemed to have decided that Lauren was its savior, and she couldn't just walk away, leaving it in the rain. That would be too cruel. "Fine," she sighed. "You're coming with me. But no funny business, okay?" Lauren picked up the cat. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and its body was warm despite its wet fur. She hurried home, feeling it purr softly in her arms. Back in the apartment, Lauren dried the cat with a towel, careful not to make it uncomfortable. It sat calmly, watching her with its large yellow eyes. Its gaze was almost human, as if it understood everything. "You're probably hungry," she said, heading to the kitchen. There wasn't much in the fridge suitable for a cat, so she gave it some tuna from a can. "This'll have to do for now. I'll buy you proper food tomorrow." The cat ate greedily, and Lauren smiled. "You must have been starving. Well, welcome home. I guess I can keep you for a while." She thought for a moment and added, "I'll call you Midnight. Black as midnight." Midnight finished his meal and curled up on the couch. Lauren watched him with affection. Maybe he just knew she couldn't leave him behind. "You're a sneaky little thing, aren't you?" she whispered. That night, as she lay in bed, Lauren couldn't sleep. She kept hearing noises, like someone walking around the apartment. Maybe it was just Midnight exploring his new space. But why so loud? "You're a cat, not an elephant." She threw off the blanket and sat up, listening. Silence. Only the faint sound of rain outside. "Probably nothing," she muttered, lying back down. But her sleep was restless. She had a strange nightmare. An invisible force was choking her, and she couldn't move. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She woke up in a cold sweat, staring at the ceiling. Her chest still felt heavy, as if someone had been pressing on her ribs. The next morning, she noticed something strange. The living room floor was sticky, as if someone had spilled something viscous. Lauren frowned and touched the spot with her finger. It was slippery and had a faint, almost chemical smell. "Midnight, did you do this?" she asked, looking around. The cat sat in the corner watching her. Its gaze was as intense as ever. "Maybe I spilled something and didn't notice," she muttered, cleaning the spot with a rag. But it didn't look like ordinary dirt. She couldn't find an explanation. The morning continued with the usual tasks. Her gaze kept returning to the cat, who sat on the windowsill watching her. He seemed to follow her every move. His yellow eyes were too meaningful, too intense. And for the first time, Lauren thought there was something strange about this cat, something that made her feel uncomfortable, even in her own home. For breakfast, Lauren decided to make scrambled eggs. She cracked a few eggs into a skillet, turned on the stove, and opened the refrigerator for milk. When she turned around to add the milk to her coffee, the lid of the pan lying next to her on the stove suddenly fell to the floor. The sound was deafening, and Lauren flinched. "Shit," she exhaled, picking up the lid. The floor was once again covered with the same sticky substance she'd discovered yesterday. Only now it wasn't just on the floor. It also smeared the bottom doors of the kitchen cabinet. What the? Lauren paused, looking closely at the stains. Suddenly, she noticed the cat turn his head in her direction. His gaze was so calm it made her uneasy. "Was that you?" she asked, pointing at the sticky puddle. It was an absurd question, of course, but Lauren couldn't help herself. The cat continued to stare at her in silence, unmoving. She exhaled and set about cleaning up. On her way to the store for cat food, she asked the clerk if anyone had reported a missing black cat. She left her number in case the owner showed up. "I'll have to write an ad when I get back. Maybe someone lost their furry friend and doesn't know where to look," she thought. When she got home, she did just that and then fed Midnight. Later, as Lauren went into the bedroom to gather linens for the laundry, her gaze fell on the bed. There were sticky stains on the sheets too. "What the hell is going on here?" she muttered. She decided to do the laundry and calm herself down. Setting the laundry basket by the bathroom entrance, she checked the rest of the apartment. There were no more stains. "Are you the one bringing contagion into the house?" she asked, jabbing a finger at the cat. "That's not how we do things, so knock it off." The cat didn't respond. Instead, he climbed into her lap and curled up, his yellow eyes closing. And just like that, the uneasiness Lauren had felt began to fade. It had been a week since Midnight showed up at the house. The advertisement had been unsuccessful. He didn't seem to have any owners, and Lauren began to notice that her life was changing. At first, these changes were minor. Strange noises at night, small slime stains on the floor or furniture that she had no way of explaining. But gradually, the events became more and more unsettling. One of the most disturbing episodes happened on a night when Lauren decided to relax after a long day at work. She settled down on the couch with a cup of hot tea and turned on a TV show. Midnight lay curled up on the windowsill nearby. His yellow eyes glowed in the dim light of the lamp, and Lauren occasionally caught herself staring at him longer than necessary. Something in his gaze unsettled her, but she tried to ignore it. As midnight approached, she began to drift off right there on the couch. The warmth of the blanket and the soft glow of the lights made her drowsy. But a sudden knocking sound jolted her awake. It came from the kitchen. Lauren froze, her heart pounding. Another knock. This time it was louder, as if something heavy had fallen. She carefully got up from the couch, trying not to make any noise, and made her way toward the kitchen. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet and cold sweat formed on her forehead. "Is someone there?" she called out, but her voice sounded uncertain. No response. When she entered the kitchen, she saw that one of the cupboard doors was open and a pot had fallen onto the floor. But that wasn't the strangest part. Around the pot, the same sticky spots had reappeared. They looked as if something viscous and slimy had been dragged across the floor. Lauren bent down to get a closer look. The odor was faint but odd, like something that had been lying in a damp, dark place for too long. "Midnight?" she called, but the cat was nowhere to be seen. Her voice echoed through the empty apartment. She searched the kitchen but found nothing unusual. When she returned to the living room, she stopped in her tracks. Midnight was sitting on the windowsill again, even though he hadn't been there a moment ago. Lauren frowned. The cat was staring at her, unblinking. "Was that you?" she asked, realizing how absurd she sounded. Midnight didn't move, but his yellow eyes seemed to study her, as if he understood every word. Lauren ran a hand over her face, feeling her anxiety grow. She felt like she was losing her mind. What if this was all just a coincidence? Could she be imagining things because of exhaustion? But deep down, she knew it wasn't her imagination. Something was happening. Something strange. The next day, Lauren decided to figure out exactly what was going on. She started researching the strange slime. After sifting through a lot of useless information, she concluded that the most logical explanation was slugs, but she hadn't seen any. Could it be Midnight? She muttered. She should take him to the vet. Why hadn't she thought of that before? He needed vaccinations and a checkup anyway. The earliest available appointment was on Thursday. "I hope you're not going to cost me a fortune. I'm not a millionaire," she said, looking at the cat. That evening, when she heard the strange noises again, she decided not to hesitate. This time she grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the sound. Her heart pounded frantically in her chest, but she forced herself to keep moving. She checked the bedroom. Nothing. Then the bathroom. Everything was quiet. The last place left was the kitchen. But as soon as she stepped inside, she froze in horror. A fresh puddle of slime covered the table where she usually prepared food. This time, it was much larger than any she had seen before. Lowering the flashlight, she noticed a long, smeared trail across the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged. The trail led straight into the living room. Summoning all her courage, Lauren followed it. Her fingers gripped the flashlight so tightly her knuckles turned white. The trail ended at the couch, where Midnight lay. He was looking at her as usual, but this time his eyes glowed with an eerie yellow light that seemed to burn through her. "What are you?" Lauren whispered. The cat didn't answer, but she could have sworn there was a mocking grin on his face. Lauren woke up in the middle of the night with a suffocating sense that something was wrong. The apartment was deathly silent, yet her instincts screamed that she wasn't alone. She cautiously pushed herself up in bed, scanning the dark bedroom. Moonlight seeped through the curtains, casting ghostly outlines on the furniture. Her gaze locked onto a shadow by the door. Midnight stood there, his yellow eyes glowing like twin embers in the darkness. At another time, she might have found it cute, but now there was something profoundly unsettling about the sight. "Midnight," she whispered, her heartbeat quickening. The cat didn't move, he just stared. His silhouette seemed larger than before, almost as if he had grown overnight. Lauren pulled the blanket up to her chest, trying to convince herself it was just a trick of the light. Then Midnight moved, not like a cat, but something else entirely. His gait was unnatural, almost human. And then, right before her eyes, his body began to change. Black fur retracted into slick, glistening skin. His limbs elongated, his paws twisting into grotesque, clawed fingers. Lauren watched in paralyzed horror as the transformation continued. Her breath caught in her throat. When it was over, the thing standing before her was no longer a cat. It was a humanoid nightmare, its entire body coated in a thick, translucent slime. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The creature regarded her with a chilling, almost amused expression. Its face still bore traces of feline features, but they were warped into something monstrous. "What are you?" Lauren barely managed to whisper, her throat tightening with terror. The creature stepped forward. Panic seized her, and Lauren finally found the strength to move. She bolted off the bed and lunged for the door, but the floor beneath her was slick. The same slimy residue the creature left behind made every step treacherous. Her feet slipped, and she nearly collapsed as she grasped for the doorknob. The monster lunged. Lauren threw herself into the hallway just as its claws swiped at the air where she'd been standing. Her legs trembled as a single thought thundered in her mind: "Get out!" She sprinted toward the front door, her fingers fumbling with the lock, but before she could turn it, something yanked her back. A violent pull spun her around, and she found herself face to face with the creature. It loomed over her, its eyes gleaming with dark amusement. Its hands, dripping with that foul, viscous slime, tightened around her wrist. Lauren let out a desperate cry and seized the nearest object, a heavy ceramic vase from the nightstand. With all the strength she had, she swung it at the creature's head. The vase shattered, shards raining to the floor. The monster barely flinched. "Get away from me!" she screamed, panic clawing at her chest. The creature didn't release her. If anything, it seemed entertained by her struggle. Its gaze gleamed in the dim light, and thick, reeking slime oozed from its body, staining the floor beneath them. Lauren twisted, elbowing it hard in the ribs. The creature's grip loosened just enough for her to wrench herself free. She stumbled backward, then turned and ran. She reached the bedroom and slammed the door shut, shoving the dresser against it with all her strength. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she scanned the room for anything that could be used as a weapon. Her eyes landed on the desk lamp. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps outside the door made her freeze. It wasn't in a hurry. It knew she had nowhere to run. Lauren gripped the lamp with both hands, bracing herself. Then suddenly, the footsteps stopped. A new sound filled the silence, a metallic scrape. Lauren's blood ran cold. The lock. Her fingers tightened around the lamp, her pulse hammering in her ears. This wasn't just some mindless creature. It was smart. "You're not getting in," she shouted, though her voice wavered. But her defiance was drowned out by the slow, creaking groan of the door as it began to open. Lauren felt the ground shift beneath her as the dresser she'd wedged against the door began to move. Not abruptly, no, it slid away smoothly, deliberately, as if the monster was savoring every second. Her breath hitched, coming in short, panicked bursts. Instinct drove her back toward the window, her trembling hands clutching the desk lamp like a makeshift weapon. She knew it was useless, but it was all she had. The door opened slowly, coated in a thick, glistening slime that dripped onto the floor in heavy, obscene droplets. A hand emerged from the darkness, long skeletal fingers ending in sharp, glassy claws. Then came the face. Yellow eyes burned through the gloom, the creature's lips stretching in an unsettling mockery of a smile. It moved leisurely, drawing out the terror, feeding on it. "What do you want?" Lauren's voice cracked. "Why me? What do you want from me?" The monster cocked its head as though considering her words. Then it took another step forward. Its body pulsed, the slime coating it dripping in slow, sickening rivulets onto the wooden floor. The wet slap of each droplet sent nausea rolling through her. Lauren couldn't take it anymore. With a desperate scream, she hurled the lamp. It struck the creature square in the chest, shattering into useless fragments. The monster didn't even flinch. It took another step, and then it grinned. A grotesque, unnatural expression that sent ice through her veins. Lauren's breath hitched. "It's playing with me, like a cat toying with a helpless mouse." "No, no, no," she whispered, backing toward the window. Her fingers fumbled for the handle, but the mechanism was jammed. She yanked at it, her strength fueled by terror. Slime dripped onto the windowsill. It was close. She whirled around just as the monster reached for her. Its outstretched hand hovered inches from her face. Lauren recoiled, tripping over her own feet. She hit the floor hard, pain jolting up her spine. Her vision blurred for a second, but she scrambled backward, her fingers grasping at anything. A book. She flung it at the creature. It didn't even blink. And then it spoke, a thick, viscous voice, like something being squeezed through wet, rotting fabric. "You chose me, and I chose you." Lauren froze. Her mind barely registered the pain in her palms from the impact. The horror of the moment consumed everything else. It could speak. She wanted to be sick. "What do you mean you chose?" she shouted, her voice shaking. "I just picked you up off the street. You were just a cat." The creature tilted its head again. "You took me into the house." The words dripped from its mouth like molasses. "Now, you are mine." Her stomach turned. He wasn't just hunting her. He believed he owned her. "No," she whispered. "No, you're wrong. You can't." She didn't get to finish. The monster lunged. A slick, clawed hand clamped around her wrist. The moment it touched her, she felt it. Heat. Burning, searing heat. The slime wasn't just cold and damp. It was alive. It crawled over her skin, seeping into her pores like living tar. Lauren screamed. She thrashed, but the grip tightened, holding her like she was nothing more than a rag doll. Its breath hit her face, sour, putrid, a mix of decay and something chemical. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying that she would wake up. She didn't. The monster lifted her effortlessly, its glowing eyes studying her, considering. Then suddenly, it let her go. Her feet hit the floor. Lauren staggered back, gasping, her body slick with its disgusting residue. The monster didn't retreat. It just stood there, watching. Tears burned down her cheeks. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. The answer came like a death sentence. Food." The moment the word left its lips, she ran. She barely made it 2 steps. The creature grabbed her by the shoulders and threw her down. Pain exploded through her back as she hit the floor. Clawed fingers dug into her skin, sharp and unrelenting. She kicked, struggling with everything she had, but the monster barely reacted. It just growled, a low guttural sound that vibrated through her ribs. Lauren's eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, but there was nothing. Slime coated everything, the floor, the walls, her. She felt it dripping down her arms, clinging to her like a second skin. She opened her mouth to scream again, but before she could, a slick, slimy finger pressed against her lips. It wanted silence. Her heartbeat thundered. A single thought pounded in her skull. This is the end. Lauren lay sprawled on the floor, her chest rising and falling in ragged, uneven breaths. The monster loomed over her, its yellow eyes burning like twin embers in the darkness. It wasn't attacking, not yet. Its claws barely pressed against her shoulders, holding her down, restraining her, but not hurting her. That was worse. It was playing. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly in her ears she was certain it could hear every frantic beat. The air stank of rot and something chemical, thick and suffocating. The monster lowered its face closer to hers, the heat of its breath searing her skin. Slime dripped from its mouth, landing on her cheek like molten wax. Lauren clenched her jaw, forcing herself not to whimper. Think. There had to be something, anything she could use. Her eyes flicked desperately across the room. Then she saw it, the broken leg of the nightstand lying just within reach. Her fingers twitched toward it, but the monster's gaze snapped to the movement. "You won't escape," it rasped. Its voice was thick, wet, seeping into her bones like the slime covering its skin. Lauren's grip tightened on nothing. "Maybe I won't," she spat, her voice raw, "but it'll cost you." With a sudden, explosive burst of motion, she drove her knee into its stomach. The monster let out a guttural snarl, recoiling just enough for her to wrench herself free. She lunged sideways, fingers closing around the table leg. With every ounce of strength she had left, she swung. Crack! The impact landed hard against its shoulder. The creature reeled back, its body convulsing, the slime on its skin bubbling and hissing. A deep, unnatural growl rumbled from its chest, vibrating through the walls. Lauren's pulse roared in her ears. She had heard it. Gripping her makeshift weapon tighter, she staggered to her feet, breathless, shaking, but standing. "You're scared, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice quivering but laced with fury. She took a step forward. The monster took one back. "You thought you could just take me? That I'd just let you?" Her fingers tightened around the wood. "No way!" The creature stilled. Then its body began to shift. Its limbs stretched, twisting, elongating into grotesque proportions. Its yellow eyes darkened into pits of blackness. Its mouth widened, too wide, splitting its face apart like an open wound. It wasn't weak. It was adapting. Lauren's stomach dropped. She took a slow, careful step backward, then another. Inch by inch, she edged toward the door, her eyes never leaving its writhing, shifting form. Then it lunged, but not at her, at the window. Crash! The glass exploded, shards flying in all directions. The entire room trembled with the force of impact. Curtains ripped free, furniture toppled, slime splattered against the walls. And just like that, the monster was gone. Lauren stood frozen, her body trembling so violently she could barely hold on to the broken table leg. Her gaze snapped to the window. Shattered glass glittered on the pavement below. The night swallowed the street in silence. It had escaped. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the floor, the weight of the moment crushing her. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The adrenaline drained from her limbs, leaving only exhaustion and the sting of fresh wounds. She was covered in scratches, in slime, in pain. But she was alive. She turned her head slowly toward the spot where the creature had stood moments ago. Nothing remained but a puddle of glistening, foul-smelling slime and shards of glass. The room was in ruins. It wasn't over. Lauren knew that. This thing, whatever it was still out there, watching, waiting. But for now, only one thought pulsed through her battered mind. I survived. Lauren needed to call someone. She needed to do something, but she was exhausted. Every step was agony. Her body ached, burned, protested every movement. She made her way to the kitchen, her legs trembling beneath her. Fumbling through the cabinet, she found the first aid kit, pried it open with stiff fingers, and grabbed the alcohol. The moment it touched her wounds, white-hot pain seared through her. She gritted her teeth, swallowing a scream. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to keep going. She wrapped the bandages tightly. Her mind screamed for protection. She grabbed the kitchen knife, held it tight. If the monster came back, she wouldn't be defenseless. Then, a rustle behind her. Lauren froze. Her breath hitched. Slowly she turned, knife raised, pulse hammering in her ears, and there he stood, the monster. It filled the doorway, its grotesque, slimy body barely fitting within the narrow frame. Its yellow eyes burned, not with hunger, not with amusement, but with rage. "You didn't think I'd leave you behind, did you?" it rasped. Lauren didn't answer, didn't think. She ran. Her feet pounded against the floor. Behind her, predatory footsteps. Quick, too quick. She barely made it 2 steps before impact. The force knocked the knife from her grip. It clattered across the floor. Slime-covered fingers wrapped around her throat. Lauren gasped, clawed at his hands, tugged, thrashed, fought, but it was useless. The grip tightened. Her lungs burned. No air, no sound, no escape. The monster leaned in, watching her with something sickeningly close to pleasure. She tried to scream. Nothing came out. Her vision blurred. Her body went limp. A deep, low purring sound rumbled from the creature's chest. Slowly, almost gently, it lowered her to the floor, like it was putting her to sleep. Then, silence. The monster stepped back and began to change. Its massive, grotesque form shrunk, limbs twisted, bending, warping until paws replaced fingers. The slime retracted, vanishing beneath sleek, thick fur. Lauren's body lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Amidst the sticky liquid, the overturned chair and shards of a broken vase, And there, perched beside her, was a cat, a small black cat. It blinked lazily, licked its paw, as if nothing had happened. A few days later, the news broadcast flickered across television screens. A tragic discovery in a Seattle apartment. The body of a young woman was found under mysterious circumstances. Authorities suspect an attempted robbery gone wrong, but strangely, nothing valuable was taken. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no security footage. Neighbors heard nothing. How could something like this happen without anyone noticing? The investigation remains at a standstill. Somewhere across the city, rain. It drizzled, pooling in gutters, running down rooftops. And there, on the curb, in a cold, shallow puddle, sat a black cat. Its yellow eyes glowed in the night. It waited, patiently, waiting for someone to show pity, to take him in, to let him inside. And then,